Beautiful, beautiful interpretation. Really, really wonderful. And now we make our way into Shabbat and into this celebration, this observance of Yom HaShoah, remembering the Holocaust. Häufen Pripyatchik brennt auf Feuer und in Staub ist es. Unsere Beland kleine Kinderlach, dem Aleph bis. Unsere Beland kleine Kinderlach, dem Aleph bis. Zetsche Kinderlach gedenkt Shatayere, was lernt Sag noch amol und tage noch amol, kommet alle vor. Sag noch amol und tage noch amol, kommet alle vor. Zetsche Kinderlach gedenkt Shatayere, was lernt Sagt noch amol und tage noch amol, kommet alle vor.
Shabbat Shalom and Hag Sameach. Tonight we share in Shabbat our connection to each other and to the world. Tonight we recognize, as Passover comes to an end, this now being the final day of Pesach, and tonight we recognize the coming of Yom HaShoah next week. If we don't recognize Yom HaShoah, if we don't take time to remember the Holocaust, who will? It's our responsibility to think of the 6 million and millions more killed during the Shoah. It's up to us to think about how we value life, something that has come up so much in this last year. How do we treat others? How do we care for them? How do we care for ourselves? What do we do that benefits us? What do we do that benefits others too? How do we stand up for our own selves and our needs? And how do we care for those around us and their needs? Tonight, we think of all of that as we share in our remembrance of the Shoah, remembrance of the pain and loss, and the hope and the promise. We'll be sharing some readings and poems and songs from before, the time of, and since the Holocaust. And we're honored to have members of our congregation sharing some of those readings with us this evening. And then later tonight, we'll hear from Zachary Levine with reflections on the Holocaust and his work through the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. We begin with readings and candles for our Shoah, and we invite Brenda Zuckerman to share some words and our blessing.
Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that softly burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. I'm so sorry. I'm thinking of something else. So sorry. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu l'hadliknei shel Shabbat.
Amen. We join together in the Kiddush. Oh, before we join together in the Kiddush, should look at my sheet and know we invite Sammy Kleinberg to share with us our next reading.
I'm a Jew and will be a Jew forever. Even if I shall die for hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I am proud of my people, how dignified they are. Even though I am surpassed, I will always come back to life.
Fronta Bass was 14 when she wrote that poem, and Sammy is almost 14. So a connection across the generations. We continue now with the Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'yahava u'bratzon hinkilanu, zikaron l'maseh v'reishit. Ki hu yom tehila lemikrai kodesh zeicher litiyat Mitzrayim. Ki vanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim ve'shabbat kodecha Be'ava uvratzon inkaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh HaShabbat l'chaim.
L'chaim. Now we take a chance to say hello to people, find out how their Passover is going, find out what they're going to have for their first non-Pesach meal this weekend, and share with each other. So we continue with some breakout rooms to get to say hello to each other. Hope you had a chance to say hello to someone new or someone familiar. And we continue now with Shalom Aleichem as we welcomed each other. We welcome the angels of Shabbat.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharit, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We have a technical check. Just give us 1 sec. Our next reader is Melissa Moyle. I think Melissa is having some technical difficulties tonight.
Hi, sorry about that.
There we go.
You think I've been doing this long enough. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
We rise for the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach, Leolam Va'ed.
Our next reader is Aaron Eisauer.
I believe. I believe in the sun, though it is late in rising. I believe in love, though it is absent. I believe in God, though he is silent.
Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu b'shakbeinu v'kumeinu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam
Ahem nege yomam valal.
Yomam Valayla. Ve'avatcha al tasir mimenu leolamim. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohevamu Yisrael.
Sorry, my picture is blocking a part of the text. Here we go. The way that leads out of the darkness is peace between siblings, care for our fellow human. To care for our siblings ardently, actively, is a way of worshiping God, a way of loving God. It was hatred without cause that brought about the destruction of the Second Temple. It will be love without cause that will save Israel and all humanity.
Israel, Adonai, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod, Shem Kevod, Malchuto, Leolam, Leolam Vaed.
Please be seated. Join with me from your homes. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha vaderech, ushokbecha uvkumecha, ukshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot beinenecha, uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvisharecha, leman tizkeru, vasitem et kol mitzvotai, v'item kedoshim lelohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim v'hiot lachem lelohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Adonai Elohechem emet. We read responsively. You shall love Adonai your God with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your being.
In the eyes of the one God, here and there are the same. They and I are one. Oceans divide us. God's presence unites us.
Set these words which I command you this day upon your heart.
To pray is to stake our very existence on the truth and on the supreme importance of that for which we pray.
Teach them faithfully to your children. Speak of them in your home and on your way, when you lie down and when you rise up.
The world is not the same since Auschwitz and Hiroshima. The decisions we make, the values we teach must be pondered not only in the halls of learning, but also before the inmates of extermination camps and in the sight of the mushroom of a nuclear explosion.
Bind them as a sign upon your hand. Let them be a symbol before your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Some are guilty, all are responsible.
Be mindful of all my mitzvot and do them. So shall you consecrate yourselves to your God.
Holiness, an essential attribute of God, can become a quality of our own, the human. and become holy. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef malchutecha ra'uv alecha bokeyayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam zeili anu ve'amru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. V'nemar kifat Adonai et Yaakov u'gelo miyad chazak mimenu. Baruch atah Adonai Gal Yisrael.
Our next reader is Martin Wolf.
Grant us, Adonai, our God, that we may lie down in peace and raise us up our ruler to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel, and for your name's sake, be our help. Shield us from hatred and plague. Keep us from war and famine and anguish. Subdue our inclination to evil. O God, our guardian and helper, our gracious and merciful ruler, give us refuge in the shadow of your wings. Coming and going, but now and always, we have life and peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, who spreads the shelter of peace over us, over all the people Israel, and over Jerusalem.
Ufrosh aleinu sukat shlomecha, Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim.
Song for Shabbat.
V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, וביום השביעי
We turn now to the Tefillah, the center section of worship. And a reminder that when Passover comes, the Givorot, the second prayer, changes a little bit in its language for the spring and summer seasons to the words Morid Hatal, who makes the dew fall. So look for that in the second prayer, different from the way you've been saying it for the last 6 months. As we continue with the Tefillah, we invite you to rise in either body or spirit.
Adonai, Sefatai Tiftachu Fi Agi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Kolei Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, u'mevii Geula livnei v'leihem, leman shemo be'ahava. Melech Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magin, Baruch atah Adonai, Magin Abraham, Ezrat Sarah. Ata Gibor leolam Adonai, Mechayei hakol, Ata Rav lehoshia, Morid hatal. Mechalkel chayim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim v'rofei cholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayem emunato lishelei gafar, Michamocha ba'al gevurot, Umido melach, Melech memit umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman ata lehachayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim b'chol yom yehalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el hakadosh.
Together, you are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Please be seated. How can we give thanks when we remember Treblinka? Only silence speaks loudly enough for our millions who are marched into the abyss. We have been where we did not find you, O hidden one. Yet even there our people sang, I believe in redemption, Anima Amin. And they sang again, Zognet kein molaz de getz dem letzten Weg. Never say you walk the final road. And even then, this deathless people was renewing itself, its life. Whose faith is equal to this people's? Whose will to live? The storm ends. In the sky, a rainbow signals hope and new life. Again and yet again, there is a song to sing.
Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shlema, be'emunah shlema, be'viat HaMashiach, be'viat HaMashiach, ani ma'amin, be'viat HaMashiach, be'viat HaMashiach, ani ma'amin. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אני מאמין.
The next reading, The Butterfly, was written by Pavel Friedman when he was a teenager in the Theresienstadt ghetto, and it will be read by Mackenzie Sisolak.
Very last, so richly, brightly, dazzlingly yellow. Perhaps if the sudden tears would sing against the white stone. Such a yellow is carried lightly way up high, and went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto, but I found what I love here. The dandelions called to me, and the white chestnut binders in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live here, in the ghetto.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Be'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Be'olam. Ki ata Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom. Ki ata Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. V'tov Beilecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael bechol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Tasim Le'olam. Tasim Le'olam. Baruch atah Adonai Hamivarech et amo Yisrael Bashalom.
We continue with our own silent prayers.
Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. Bo yirtom rikhbo, nabashviki bo, lo shachav libo, gam lo rasheina. Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi יתראות, ישל קורות, לך ולך נושאו, קולם ותפארנה. Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena. Hamalach Koel, Nifnei Dal Shoel, Anna, Avraham Hakreina, Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havela, Eli, Eliyahu, Hanavi Havela.
As we remember the Shoah, we need healing. Healing for the incredible loss that our people took. Healing for the pain of our own families, the tears of our ancestors, the rejection, the murder. Pain for the anti-Semitism and hatred we still see today, directed at Jews, and the racism and bigotry shown to so many other peoples. We need healing. And so we have a prayer for healing. It's a prayer for all of those pains. And it's a prayer for all of those who are sick and ill and need our strength and our love. Those battling COVID and those struggling with so many other pains and losses. If there's someone you're thinking of who needs healing at this time, we invite you to put their names in the chat so we can recognize all the people that we're thinking of as we join together in this Mishaberach for healing.
Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBeracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBeracha Leimotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say
Along with the names that fill our chat and our heart, we're also thinking of Elaine Wall, Helen Schloss, Rochelle Weinberg, Ronnie Heller, Jamie Stern, Joan Lipton, Arlene Green, Sadie Rosenkrantz, Elise Leibowitz, Roberta Traeger, Jody Ann Herman, Marty Davidowitz, Helene Cannon, Ruth Scheidlauer, and so many more that all of us care for and look for healing and hope. Amen. We are honored tonight to have a very special guest speaker to share with us about the Holocaust. Zachary Paul Levine is the Director for Archival and Curatorial Affairs in the National Institute for Holocaust Documentation at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. There he oversees all acquisition and archival processing for objects, paper and digital records, and time-based media. For over a decade, Zachary Levine has curated exhibitions, consulted on strategic and master planning, and guided collecting and project management for museums across North America, including exhibitions at the National Building Museum in DC, the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, DC as well, and Yeshiva University Museum in New York City, among many others, museums and cultural institutions. Levine trained as a historian of Eastern and Central Europe, specializing in Jewish history, the Cold War, and international philanthropy, especially aid to Jews in East and Central Europe after the Second World War. He serves as vice chair on the Council of American Jewish Museums. He is also the son-in-law of our friends, Richard and Beverly Farber. We're delighted to have Zachary Levine share with us this evening.
Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you all and to be with my long lost compatriots in New York. As a recovering New Yorker in Washington, there will always be one. And thank you to Bev and Rich for inviting me, and to Rabbi for inviting me up here. Just a little bit more about who I am. I lived in New York for quite a while for graduate school, and cut my teeth as a historian in graduate school, but then fell into museums. And I'm giving you this background because I realized that it was in museums that I could really, I think, do my best work in the world. And about a year ago, a friend of mine bugged me to apply for this job at the Holocaust Museum, and I didn't want to at all. I was going to do something else, but she wouldn't let up. I applied for the job, and a few months later, I got a call that I was going to be interviewed. And all of a sudden, after doing a little bit of research, I realized that I was in the right place at the right time. In looking at the mission of the museum, one of the main points of the museum is to end genocide. And the idea of being part of an organization whose sole role is to end the systematic oppression and murder and really the end of entire civilizations, much like what was done to European Jewish civilization, was something that I think I, as a human, couldn't pass up. But I also want to talk about Pesach and about Exodus. And I'm going to apologize preemptively if I steal the thunder of anybody who's giving a Devar Torah tomorrow. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Parsha, and then trust me, as I should never say in any time I speak, trust me, this will all make sense in the end. I might talk about Pesach and Exodus and offer examples from the museum's collections, but it's Shabbos, and I'm going to choose perhaps to work just a little bit less today, showing these things. And I'm going to start with this Parsha. So I'm going to summarize, and I apologize if I go a little bit fast. So this week's Parsha, it's the climactic conclusion of the flight out of Egypt. It starts with the Jews moving toward the Red Sea as they travel out of Egypt. And it's interesting, Moses carries Joseph's bones on his way out of Egypt. Joseph, who had settled, who had essentially settled and created the Jewish community in Egypt centuries earlier. The Israelites went to the edge of the sea and they waited and they sat there in the desert, and it was hot and they were trapped. And what would you would know it from the rest of the story already. Pharaoh's heart hardened once again, and so started the race to once again stop the Jews from leaving Egypt. He harnessed up his chariot and led his servants and his armies and his generals and so on after the Israelites. The children of Israel started wailing and demanding to return to their slavery when Moses raised his hand and the Spirit of God split the Red Sea, and the Jews quickly moved past to the other side over dry land where there had been the sea, led at night by a pillar of fire in the distance that guided them as they traveled. And just as they passed onto the mainland, as the morning sun rose, Moses once again raised his hand, but this time the waters crashed down and the Egyptian pursuers were crushed beneath the waves. The Israelites broke into song, extolling God's might and power. Miriam and many of the other women danced with their timbrels, and everybody was happy, until a little later when they continued to walk into the desert. And the Parsha for this week concludes with the Jews looking for water, only finding it after 3 days of wandering through the desert. And what they found was, what the Torah says, was bitter or dirty or contaminated water, until, following God's instructions, Moses tossed a piece of wood into the water and it became sweet. And the conclusion of the story is an ordinance for the Jewish people that they trust God and follow God's commandments. What a story. And indeed, it's a story that has fascinated me since I was really young, since I think I was in like Hebrew school and I was 3 or 4. And maybe it's because it was the first Bible story that I learned. It's very possible. But more than that, it's the drama of the story that's always attracted me. It's relatable. And in fact, it's something that's easy to analyze from multiple perspectives. And this is where I'm gonna apologize preemptively for being a historian, because historians are Jews. There's one story and about 10 opinions. For me personally, it's kind of a family history. It fits my family history, one that I certainly share with many people in the congregation here, many people generally. The story of the Exodus here is one of hardship. We celebrate this story as the first steps into freedom. But for the Israelites, it was also the first dramatic steps into the wilderness. It reminds me of the steps that my grandparents took as they escaped the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany in 1939. My grandfather grew up in a shtetl a day or so outside of Warsaw called Drobin. There's a monument to it in a large cemetery in New Jersey, just across the East River. My grandmother was from Warsaw, and during the attack, she and my grandfather happened to be in Moscow. The story that the family tells is that my grandmother and my grandfather escaped, and they went east in the nick of time and fled as far as they could get with several 100,000 other Polish Jews, and they found sanctuary in Siberia in present-day Uzbekistan. The story continues that they met a couple of months or a couple of years later in a long underwear factory. Recently, I've been learning more and more about this kind of story through my work at the Holocaust Museum, where we are working with the Uzbek government to copy records related to Jews who fled to the Soviet Union. A friend of mine, who I was talking to about this work, who's not at the museum, as I was telling her this, she sent me a link to a photograph in our collection from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, featuring a picture of a wedding that she had just found, which happened to be the wedding of her grandparents. It's amazing the stuff you find in these collections. Now you might think that I'm going to talk about the Jews fleeing the Holocaust, how they found home and safety and community in Siberia. Sure, they did. My grandparents, after all, found each other, and I'm here because of it. And I also should add that one of my colleagues is also here because of it, turns out. But my thinking has always been on the bravery that it took to leave behind everything, and in some cases, such as my grandfather's, everyone that they knew behind. What did it mean to take those first steps away from oppression, not necessarily to freedom? What did it mean? What did it feel like to be escaping one thing, but potentially walking into an entirely different hell? After all, life in Siberia was never easy, and life traveling through the Sinai for 40 years was never easy either. When I think about these challenges and framing these first moments of the Exodus as a journey into freedom, rather than the first steps of a journey into the abyss, I start to think about other people and other perspectives in this history. What are we missing by focusing on the celebrations of God saving the Jews as the fear from the Jews that quickly came with the realization that they could never go back? The sea had closed and blocked their path back, even if they wanted to go back. And we know repeatedly that they wanted to go back. We might miss out on understanding what it was like for the Egyptian charioteer racing along the seabed as the waters crashed down. We might miss the chaos that ensued in Egypt with the sudden annihilation of Pharaoh and many of his highest ranking generals and soldiers. None of this is to defend them, far from it. Rather, to offer some additional perspective. So then, how do we square this with our historical memories of the Jewish past? Whether it's over the Exodus, the Holocaust, or where our families came from, what we've been doing as a community for a year, for generations. What are we missing in the stories that we tell ourselves and about our identities? In fact, the story of my grandparents has only gotten more opaque for me. Shortly after starting at the Holocaust Museum, I started looking at some of our resources. And one set of resources is the database that we have that features papers of Jews who were transiting through Germany on their way to other places. And I found my grandfather's paper, and it said in it that he had spent the entire war in Poland. So I go to my mother and I said, Mom, I swear you told me that he was in Siberia. What's the story? And she said, oh, yeah. He said he was in Poland because he didn't want anybody to think he was a communist, and he was traveling on his brother's papers. His brother survived the war, but did go through Auschwitz. This has made me realize that it's very hard to trust even the documentation, let alone our memories. As a historian, I'm both vexed and I'm inspired by the varying dimensions of these stories and the histories that we live with, that make us, that help us have our identities and have a connection with one another. It makes for some uncomfortable questions, though. The most fundamental of which is something like, how do we know that the thing that we know is really real? At the Holocaust Museum, we have taken this challenge on by looking not just at the stories and the experiences of survivors and the victims of the Holocaust, which are incredibly important, and it's the core of what we do. We are not just a museum, we are a memorial museum. And so anytime we get a story, we hear the story, it is incumbent upon us to preserve it and to save it for humanity, not just to teach, but also to remember. But we don't do this to excuse what happened. Rather, we do it, but we also look at the stories of the bystanders, the witnesses, and the perpetrators of the Holocaust. We don't do this to excuse what happened. Rather, we do it so that we can understand why it happened. For me, as a historian, understanding the why question has always been the most important thing. Why did a continent murder millions of its own people? Why did several emerging democracies turn against themselves? What was it like to feel utterly powerless against the power of a fascist state? We have to ask these questions so that we can get the whole story, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it complicates our understanding of the past. It is something we must do to ensure that it never happens again. And perhaps most fundamentally, it's something that we must do to understand human nature. To bring it back to the Parsha and to Exodus, this approach certainly complicates things. Was it right for the Israelites to celebrate the deaths of their pursuers? As they did, they broke out in song. After all, their pursuers were also God's creation. Did Moses sin when he killed the Egyptian taskmaster earlier in the story? Now, it's less important for me, at least, to find an answer to these questions than it is to ask them and to debate them first off. Indeed, that might be what makes me a Jewish historian. It's surely uncomfortable to have to look deep into our historical memories and debate what's factual and what we would like to be factual. That I want my grandparents to have met in a long underwear factory in Siberia. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. But it's part of the story, and the search for it is what helps make a whole story. But it's something we have to do. And at least in my opinion, it makes the story a lot more interesting. Now, the last thing I want to do is leave you with such a bummer, or at least such an ambiguous message. So perhaps we can, and I think we can talk about what might, in fact, be the end to this nightmare of the coronavirus pandemic's worst moment. This last year, it might be ending in the coming months. It certainly might feel like that, like we've been wandering in the desert together or apart over the last year. For those who have been vaccinated, not to mention the many more people who await vaccination, it may feel like freedom is in fact on the horizon, like the Red Sea is just parting and more of us are starting to take those first steps across the dry seabed into freedom. But I, like many others, as excited as I am, I have a lot of anxiety about the future. This gnawing feeling that about what it's going to be like when that moment comes. It's fraught with emotions. It's fraught with all sorts of activity. What will work life be like? What is it going to be like to ride the subway again? What will it be like to deal with traffic and the quotidian frustrations that some of us have been lucky enough to avoid over the last year? Now, that's not to say that it won't be wonderful to see our families and hug one another and see friends. But there's a lot there that's a little scary, at least for me. If there is a silver lining in this moment, and we know that there are many, it's the realization that we will have gotten through this chapter and that we have gotten through it together, even if we've been apart. Even if we've been apart this whole time, learning how to use Zoom and see each other and have drinks and talk to our families this way. And that is the story for the Jews who left Egypt, for the Jews who survived the Holocaust, and even for some who didn't ever since. Even as we have struggled out of the familiar into the wilderness, we have done it together. Much like the ways that God and Moses anchored the ancient Israelites, we as Jews, as Americans, and as humans have the fact that we exist together and rely on each other, and that this feeling of connection will help us carry ourselves and each other through. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for that powerful and meaningful and connection to so many things, the Holocaust, our Torah portion, Passover, our current times. Is it okay if we take a couple questions? So since I can't see you to call on you, if you have a question, put it into the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll pick a few out, or Zachary, if you see a question in the chat that strikes with you, please just go ahead and take it. Right now is such a busy time in the world. There's so much happening on every level, just in the United States, wherever we look. And a lot of what's happening right now in the US seems to be based a bit on hatred and division, perhaps a different way than it was in the 60s or in the 40s or in the 20s, but nonetheless, where people are dividing rather than joining together. How do you, through your work at the Holocaust Museum, through just your own insights, see the divisions that are going on in America today as you think about history?
So one of the luxuries about my job, to be completely honest, is that I get to focus on collecting, and I get to focus on working with the people who do the collecting. So from my perspective, and when I think about what I'm using my powers for, essentially, it is to collect as much of the material, of the evidence of what happened, to make it understandable and to make it universal. So that when we talk about the Holocaust, it's not a story about, I come from a lot of museums and a lot of Jewish museums. It's not, the story that we tell is not the story that happened to us. We tell the story that happened to lots of people from multiple dimensions, so that in the present, we can understand what happened. So when it's talking about democracy and challenges to democracy, that we can create, I think that we can present an example about what can happen if a democracy tries to kill itself. When we talk about genocides that are going on right now with the Rohingya, we can do exhibitions, which we have one that will open whenever we get to open, about the Rohingya, which we've also had in the past about others. So we do provide this connective tissue, I think, to the present very much so. At the same time, something that we also do, which maybe you wouldn't think is that big a deal. We also we are striving to make the millions and millions and millions of objects and papers and copy collections and so on that we have available to anyone, anywhere, anytime online, so that people can go through and find out this stuff on their own and search it and discover these stories. Because at the end of the day, I firmly believe that by knowing about what happened in the past will help us understand what's going on in the present, so that we can prevent the darkest moments of history from ever happening again.
There's two somewhat related questions in the chat. One asking, how does the museum help to defeat genocide? And another asking, what are the contemporary genocides that you're addressing today, and how do you address them? So could you talk for a little bit about how the museum, which wasn't founded as a museum of genocide, it was the Holocaust Museum, how it has started to do work on genocide issues? So there are a couple of different ways, and we are not a genocide museum. And at the end of the day, we have those pressures, trust me. And it's tricky for us. So we do a couple of different things. One is we have temporary exhibitions and programs, including this one that I mentioned on the Rohingya coming up. We also have a center that is for the study of anti-Semitism, that itself also deals with Holocaust denial and distortion, but in so doing uses a fair number of comparative studies and comparisons
to draw connections with the present. Those are, some of the I think the best examples. But we also do a great deal of education at all levels. From we're a federal institution, so we work with the military, we work with police, we work with students all over the world. We also work with national and international leaders and regularly have seminars. In fact, I've got a seminar coming up, I think in 2 weeks, with a number of scholars working at different libraries and archives from around the world to learn about how we do our work and why we do our work.
Every year, we take our 10th graders down to Washington, D.C. to learn about lobbying. And we always go to the Holocaust Museum as part of the trip. For those of you who have never been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, it's an obligation. It's a must as a Jew to go there and see this incredible way of sharing history and helping us understand it to the future. But if you have been there before, first, it's worth going back. You're going to see things you didn't see the first time. There's so much there. But also the temporary exhibits there are always just fascinating. And now that I've been there every single year, I head right to the temporary exhibits and I always take my time there to really absorb them and what I can see there. And we'll take this as our final question. What can we do to keep the Holocaust meaningful for our children who see it as ancient history?
It's funny. I would have asked that question until, well, let me tell you a story. About a little over a year ago, a museum in DC called the Newseum was closing. And my wife, Allison, Bevan Rich's daughter, took our son, Misha, to the museum the day that for the last day that it was closing. And at the time he was 7, and she sends me a text. Oh no, Misha just learned about the Holocaust. Because he had gone into a movie and there was a news reportage of the liberation, I think, of Dachau. And we sort of prepare, she had worked at the Museum of Jewish Heritage for a few years on education, and both of us had been thinking about how are we going to talk about this to our son. And so he comes home and we talk to him about it, and he wasn't upset. He wasn't shocked. He actually, it took him a few days to process, but he felt, I think, motivated. I think he felt that there was a sense, it inspired with him a sense of justice and a sense that, in fact, he had some power to A, learn about this, and B, to ensure through various types of activism as he grew older that something like this would never happen. So this is a long way to answer the question, which is that I think actually expressing that these events happened and why they happened may in fact be enough. I think children, as we all know, are incredibly intelligent and adept, and the actions in this case, I think, really sadly speak for themselves. So I'm not worried about kids seeing this as ancient history. Rather, I'm worried about adults seeing it as ancient history. But I think for me and for my institution, our task is bringing it out to the children. Can I share one other thing?
Of course.
Sure. So first of all, I've actually never met any of my colleagues. I started working at the museum in June, so I've been doing this for months. But the place where I'm going to work, where I'm going to have my office, is actually not in the museum. It's in a research facility that houses all of our materials, all of our collections, millions of things. And I got a tour of it a few years before I even started, way before I started working, when I worked for another museum. And, as a historian, you sort of get used to this stuff. You get a little bit numb to it. And I had this moment when I went into the room when I went into the storage area, and I was the only person who had any sense of Jewish history who was on this tour. And I found myself standing in this, what we call the large object vault. It's this big room, and it's where, surprise, surprise, we put our large objects. And I'm standing in this very quiet room, and it's about 30 feet tall, things stacked all over the place, very well organized, I should say. On the floor are tombstones taken from the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto. Next to that is a carriage that was used to carry dead bodies, supposedly either in a ghetto or in a concentration camp. At the end of the way was a very old machine, like a giant cube almost, and it said IBM on it. And this was the machine that Nazi officials used to tabulate who was and who wasn't Jewish and what should happen to them. And at that moment, having that proximity to these objects gave me this, it was this incredibly chilling sense that the objects themselves embodied the gravity of this story. And it gave me this sense that it was actually bringing these objects and bringing the evidence of this story to people that is so critical and so important for what the museum does, but really what all of us who talk about the Holocaust and bring the story of the Holocaust to other people do. So it's something that has just stuck with me and still sticks with me, even though I haven't been in the building yet. But anyway, thank you very much, everybody. I did note in the chat, incidentally, if you have materials that you are interested in donating, you can write to curator@ushmm.org. I'm going to make the assumption that if folks on this call have not donated before, you probably know somebody who has. We have a lot of materials from folks from the Forest Hills community, but we are really interested in whatever you have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zachary, so much for your words and your guidance. Shabbat Shalom. This has been a Pesach week, and Pesach is a time generally of joy. And even as we face the Shoah, we can't only look at pain and loss and sadness. We have to recognize hope and promise, family and pleasure. And so we invite you to put into the chat, if you have a simcha, something good that has happened to you or a member of your family in recent days. It's easy to dwell on the pain and the sadness. Let's take a moment to recognize the good and the joy in each other's lives. So people celebrated wonderful seders of all types, chances to see family and friends, upcoming life cycle events, or birthdays that are happening right now. Happy birthday, Phyllis. New jobs, new connections, new opportunities to see people face to face thanks to the miracle of science. It's good to have many blessings that we can share with each other and ourselves. Keep striving for more, but for those related to the vaccine, not get too bold and be cautious about what we do. As we share these good blessings with each other, we turn to a prayer of blessing as we conclude to our concluding blessings of our service with the Aleinu, and we invite you to rise in either body or spirit.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המולם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Next reader is David Reinhardt.
I've met enough people, seldom a human being. Therefore, I will wait until my life's purpose is fulfilled and you will come. Though there is anguish deep in my soul, what if I must search for you forever? I must not lose faith. I must not lose hope.
As we share tonight, we have a chance to share memories and names, thoughts and reflections of people we miss. We're going to share two sets of names tonight. In a little bit, we're going to share the names we usually share, those whose yahrzeit occur at this time and those who have passed away in recent weeks. But for right now, we want a different set of names to share. We'd like you to put into the chat, and we'd so much rather we shared this by voice and all heard it with our own ears, but we'd like you to put into the chat the names of those in your family, or just groups of names if you don't know specific names of people who perished in the Shoah, as well as adding to that your family who survived the Shoah but have died since then, as most of our survivors have passed on. Those who've witnessed the Shoah with their own eyes and bodies, share their names in our chat now so we can remember them. And as we share these names, we'll share the song, Yesh Kochavim.
יש כוכבים שהאורם מגיע ארצה, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואילם. יש אנשים שהזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המלחיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember.
In memory of all of those in our families, so many, many names that filled just our small community's chat. Now multiply that by the entire Jewish world. In memory of the 6 million, we share this blessing of memory, El Malei Rachamim. We invite you to rise in body or in spirit.
El Malei Rachamim, shochen b'amromim, חמסי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע, מזהירים את נשמות 6,000,000 אחינו ואחיותינו שנהרגו על קדוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים עד נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם, ולומר Amen.
Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
We share now names of people in our own congregation and community whose yard sites occur at this time. In addition to these names, if you're thinking of someone in particular, feel free to add them to the chat for all of us to see. This week, we remember Robert Adams, Alexandra Adelson, Rudy Barth, Estelle Berlow, Florence Buckmeyer, Helen Bachansky, Ruth Dranoff, Emmanuel Feldman, Frank Fish, Wei Kwok Fong, John Frumkes, May Gilman, Mark R. Glucksman, Anna M. Goldberg, Dorothy I. Goodman, Joseph Grossman, Regina Versano Halfon, Charles Kampfer, Hermine Neller, Edith Constant, Martin I. Kirk, Ernst M. Liederman, Saul Levy, Elias Ludmerer, Helene Michaelis, Frank Michaels, Augusta Miller, Selma Nathan, Sam Nogood, Gertrude Poulter, Fred Pettigore, Harold Pettigore, Benjamin Shower, Bess Schindler, Burton Schwartz, Barry Smith, William Sokolow, Philip Sternberg, Estelle Taylor, Jeffrey Sean Tischler. We note in sadness the recent passing and laying to rest of Ted Cannon, brother-in-law of Cheryl and Andy Kimmler, Rabbi Michael Cook, professor of Rabbi Mark Kaiserman, and the recent passings of Adam Shelton, cousin of Aaron Eisauer, Dominic Albee, father of Frank Albee, Selma Pockler, grandmother of Josh Bogard, Kay Plotnick, aunt of Suzanne Rosenberg. We add to these names that are in our chat and names that are in our heart. And we invite you, if you wish, to unmute yourself and join all of us as we share together in the Mourner's Kaddish. Yit Gadal, Yit Gadash, Shmei Rabbah, Yalma, Ayed Yomaton, Ayed Israel, Agalah, Bizman Karim, Ru, Amen. Hey, Shmei Rabbah, Mivarach, Lam, Me, Omaya. Amen. Shalom Romav, Shalom, Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael, v'yamru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to every broken heart among us. And let us say, Amen.
Shalom bimromav uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. We invite our temple president, Neil Rosenblatt, to share some words with the congregation.
Good evening, my friends, and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, as always, to Rabbi and Cantor, to Faye, to Alan, Cheryl, and the RTF tech team for all of their work behind the scenes that allow us to enjoy our time together. I've said it repeatedly, our congregation is blessed to have some incredible musical talent at its disposal, and tonight was just another example of this. I look forward to a point sometime soon when we can all enjoy the musical musings of our friend Joe Davidian together in the sanctuary. A huge thank you to our special guest, Zach Levine. As someone who taught history for 13 plus years, your comments about questions and discussions should be at the center of any history class. And as we move further away from the greatest tragedy known to man, listening and learning about the Holocaust becomes that much more important. Never forget and never take for granted the freedoms that we all enjoy today. As always, there's a lot happening in the world at RTFH. Make sure you're paying attention to the weekly e-blasts. In case you missed this week's edition, just a couple of highlights. We have Passover morning services tomorrow with Yisker at 10:30. Wednesday night at 7:30, we welcome Michael Berenbaum, a noted Holocaust scholar. And next Friday night, services switch to 6:15 for our monthly Shabbat Rishon. And just a little further down the road, and that'll be 2 weeks from tomorrow, we celebrate the Great American Jewish Songbook with a concert led by Cantor Pincus and a host of special guests. So as I usually close out with a song lyric, I'm actually going to refer more to a song, and I'll post the link in the chat momentarily. One of my favorite bands is Rush, and their lead singer, Geddy Lee, penned a song called Red Sector A. It reflected on his mother's liberation from the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Again, rather than offer the lyric, I'm going to suggest you give the song a listen when you get a chance. Shabbat Shalom, and never forget.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Neil. Well, no challahs to share tonight. I mean, if you have one, you probably shouldn't show us that. But you might have a box of matzah around that you're saying motzi on. So if you want to go get a box of matzah, we'll spotlight a few of those just for fun. Elon, and thanks to Elon Birnbaum for working behind the scenes tonight. If you two can help me with adding spotlights. So we got a few nice boxes of matzah showing up. Jewish law, you have to finish it all by tomorrow at sundown. So get going. No, I'm kidding. You can save it for weeks. It'll never go bad. Your great grandchildren can eat this matzah. It's probably okay. So with a little bit of matzah out there, looks like Horowitz matzah is winning the brand of matzah wars right now tonight. But the Geffens, Shapiro's have whole wheat matzah, so they're going. Why don't we, if you want to, just unmute yourself and we'll all join together in the motzi. So take a minute to unmute yourself. And 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Te'avon, everyone. And now as we go to the conclusion of our service, we do so with the song Halakha LaKesaria, a walk to Caesarea, known by its alternate title, Eli Eli, written by Hannah Senesh, the young paratrooper who wrote beautiful music that we sing in our services, but also died trying to liberate Jews in Europe during the Holocaust. Eli, Eli.
Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol ve'ayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat adam, hachol ve'ayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat adam. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
Shabbat Shalom, Hag Sameach, and Zachor. Always remember.
Always
Shabbat
remember.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Shabbat
See you tomorrow
shalom.
morning
See you
for
tomorrow,
study.
Judy. Always remember.
Shalom.
See you tomorrow,
Birthday,
Thursday.
Phyllis.
Shabbat
Shalom. Hag Sameach.
Phyllis, Mazel tov.
See you tomorrow
Happy
for
Happy
birthday.
birthday, Phyllis.
How does it feel to become 21, Phyllis?
Bye, everyone. Be well.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday, Phyllis.
Birthday, Phyllis.
Birthday wishes, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well, everybody.
Good
Shabbat
to
shalom.
see
Shabbat shalom.
Arnie and Barbara and Mildred and Susan and Stanley and Linda and Arlene and Lillian, Karen and Marty, Dewey, Emily, although I can't see you, Emily, you're invisible.
I'm there.
Jody.
See you tomorrow
Great. There
morning.
you are, Emily. Let there be light. It's great to see you all. Shabbat Shalom and Hag Sameach, and Beverly and Richard. So wonderful to see the two of you. Thank you for lending us your son-in-law tonight.
I hope he impressed you. He impressed us.
So much so.
Right.
Good night, everybody.
No, but see you tomorrow morning, George.